I was looking at the stack of research for today, and I realized something kind of unsettling.
Oh, yeah?
We spend so much energy worrying about things that are, statistically almost impossible.
Yeah.
Shark attacks, plane crashes.
Right, our internal risk assessment hardware is a little buggy. We obsess over these huge, spectacular events and just completely ignore the dangers we face every day.
It really is buggy.
Mm.
Because the most dangerous thing most of us do, I mean, if you look at the numbers, is something we did this morning without a second thought.
Get in the car.
Exactly. We got into a 2-ton metal box, surrounded ourselves with glass and flammable liquid, and then hurtled down a road at 70 miles an hour, feet from other people doing the exact same thing.
And probably while thinking about what to make for dinner or, singing along to the radio.
We've just normalized it. But today, we're stripping that away. We're doing a deep dive into car accident survival. And I don't just mean surviving the crash itself.
No.
I mean surviving the chaos that comes after.
Yeah.
The legal stuff, the insurance maze, the psychological fallout.
It's a massive topic. The source material we're working with today is basically a masterclass in crisis management. We've got World Health Organization data, legal guides, medical advice. It's the manual you wish you never needed.
But you definitely want to have read before you need it.
Exactly.
And our mission today is pretty simple. We're building a mental checklist because the sources make one thing crystal clear. When metal crunches and airbags go off, you don't rise to the occasion.
You sink to the level of your training.
Or in this case, your preparation.
Yeah.
When your brain just goes into panic mode, you need a script to follow. So let's start with the why. Why do we need this checklist so badly? I look at the global stats from the WHO, and honestly, they look like war casualties.
They essentially are. The data is, it's staggering. We are talking about 1.35 million deaths every year.
That's a hard number to even picture.
It is. So think of it this way. That's the entire population of a city like Dallas, or maybe Prague, just wiped off the map.
Wow. That really puts it in perspective. And it's not evenly distributed, right? I saw this really tragic statistic about who's actually dying.
Yeah, this is the one that usually stops parents in their tracks. Road accidents are the #1 leading cause of death for children and young adults aged 5 to 29.
The #1 killer.
It kills more young people than disease, more than suicide, more than conflict. It is the single biggest threat to the next generation globally.
That is heavy.
Yeah.
It totally changes how you look at a teenager getting their license. It's not just a rite of passage.
No, it's entering a high-risk zone. And the sources point out this weird economic disparity, too.
The inequality of safety, they call it.
Right. 90% of these fatalities happen in low and middle-income countries. But here's the twist. Those countries only have about 60% of the world's vehicles.
So fewer cars, but drastically more death. Is that just bad roads or what?
It's a whole Swiss cheese model of failure. You've got gaps in infrastructure, gaps in vehicle safety standards, gaps in trauma care access. If an ambulance takes 2 hours to get there,
Survival rates just plummet.
they plummet. And the cost is astronomical. The sources estimate these crashes cost most countries 3 to 5% of their entire GDP.
That's billions. I mean, that's money that could build hospitals or schools, just vaporized in bent metal in medical bills.
And we have to talk about vulnerable road users. We tend to think of accidents as car-on-car.
Right.
But half of all deaths are pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists.
People with zero steel cage around them.
Exactly. Motorcyclists and cyclists alone are 28% of all deaths. So understanding this landscape helps us realize this isn't a maybe problem. It's a when problem. The risk is always there.
Okay, so let's zoom in. The unimaginable happens. Bam, you've been hit. The car stops. Dust is everywhere. The sources call this the golden minute. What is happening right now?
Chaos. Absolute neurological chaos. Your brain is just flooding with cortisol and adrenaline. The fight or flight response is overriding all your logic.
And this is where most people make their first critical mistake.
They do. They check the car.
Oh, I feel called out. I would totally look at my bumper first. Is my car okay?
It's human nature. We possess things, we check our possessions, or we get angry. But the sources are so adamant there's only one question you're allowed to ask in that golden minute.
Is anyone injured?
That's it. But here's the trap.
What's the trap?
You can't trust your own answer.
What do you mean? If I say, I'm fine, am I not fine?
You might not be, and this is so important. Adrenaline is one of the most powerful painkillers on Earth. It's designed to let you run from a tiger even if your leg is broken.
Right.
You could have a fractured rib, internal bleeding, severe whiplash, and for about 30 to 60 minutes, you might feel well, superhuman. You could be walking around exchanging insurance info while your body is technically in crisis.
That is terrifying. So the advice is to assume you are injured.
If the impact was significant, yes. Seek medical attention immediately. And this isn't just about health, though that's priority one. It's about the legal aftermath that we'll get to.
Okay, so how does seeing a doctor right away help you legally?
It establishes the timeline. If you tell the police, I'm fine at the scene because you're full of adrenaline, and then 3 days later you wake up and you can't move your neck.
So you go to the ER then?
Right. The insurance company looks at that record and sees a 3-day gap in treatment.
And they use that to deny the claim.
They will argue, if he was really hurt, he would have gone in an ambulance. Maybe he hurt his neck moving furniture yesterday. The medical paper trail has to start at the scene. It's evidence.
That's a crucial insight. So I'm fine is actually a dangerous sentence.
It really is. Even if you feel okay, the better answer is, I'm going to get checked out by a professional. And the sources also touch on the invisible injury, PTSD.
Right. Post-traumatic stress disorder. We usually associate that with combat, but I mean, a car crash is violent.
It's incredibly violent. And the source notes that the emotional shock starts immediately. Confusion, shaking. That's part of the injury. Just acknowledging that, hey, I might be in shock right now can help you make better decisions.
Okay, so we've checked for injuries, we've called 911, now we're waiting. The source material shifts into this really interesting phase I like to call detective mode.
This is where you have to suppress the panic and just start gathering data. Because memories are faulty and they fade fast. The police report is important, but you can't rely on the officer to catch everything.
So, photos and videos. But what's the pro tip here? What are most people missing when they take those photos?
Context. People take close-ups of the dent. That's useless. We know the headlight is smashed. We need the story.
Okay.
You want wide shots. Show the position of the cars relative to the lane lines. Show the skid marks or the lack of them.
Why does the lack of skid marks matter?
No skid marks might mean the other driver didn't even brake. That suggests distraction. That is massive evidence. You also want to photograph the environment. Was the sun in their eyes? Was a stop sign blocked by a bush?
It really is CSI stuff. You're documenting the physics of the crash.
You're preserving the crime scene, basically. And
Yeah.
witnesses are key. The source makes a great point. People want to leave. They've got places to be. If you don't get a name and number in their first 5 minutes, that witness is gone forever.
An independent witness is gold.
Worth their weight in gold in court.
Now, we have to talk about the biggest do not in the source material. This is the one that's going to be hardest for, polite people.
Traffic apology rule.
It goes against every fiber of my being. If I jump out of my car, my first instinct is to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, are you okay?
And you have to swallow that instinct. The sources are strict. Never admit fault at the scene.
But isn't saying I'm sorry just being a decent human?
In a coffee shop when you bump someone,
Yeah.
yes. At a crash scene, no. I'm sorry, can be interpreted as a legal admission of liability. It can be used against you.
But what if I think it was my fault? What if I rear-ended them? Isn't it obvious?
Not necessarily, and this is the key insight from the sources. You don't have all the facts yet. You only have your perspective.
What do you mean?
Well, what if their brake lights were broken so you didn't know they were stopping? What if they merged recklessly right into your braking distance?
I see. So by saying I'm sorry, I'm basically shutting down the investigation into their behavior.
Exactly. You're taking 100% of the blame when the reality might be 50-50. This brings up that legal concept of comparative negligence.
Bring that down for us. That sounds like lawyer speak.
It's actually pretty logical. Think of fault like a pizza. Rarely is the pizza 100% one person's. Maybe you were speeding, that's a slice. But maybe they ran a red light. That's a bigger slice.
So in a lawsuit, my compensation gets reduced by my percentage of the pizza.
Correct. So if the court decides you were 20% at fault, you lose 20% of the settlement. But if you stand up and say, my bad, totally my fault, you just handed them the whole pizza.
You volunteered for 100% liability.
Let the professionals figure out the math. You just state the facts. I was traveling north. The impact occurred here.
Just the facts. It requires a lot of discipline in that moment.
It does. And speaking of professionals, they sometimes bring in accident reconstructionists. These are people who use physics to look at the crush depth of the metal to calculate speed. They don't need your apology. They need data.
Okay, moving on. We've survived the crash. We've played detective. We kept our mouths shut about fault. Now we go home. But the sources make it clear. This is where the hard work begins.
Welcome to the aftermath. This is the administrative marathon. And there's one tool the source suggested that I absolutely love because it's so low tech but so brilliant.
The symptom journal.
Yes, a simple notebook or, a notes app on your phone.
Why is this so critical? Can't I just tell the doctor where it hurts?
You can, but legal cases can take years. 2 years from now, are you going to remember that on Tuesday, October 14th, your neck hurt so bad you couldn't pick up your toddler?
Probably not. I can barely remember what I did last Tuesday.
Exactly. But that detail matters. Pain and suffering is a vague legal term. A journal makes it concrete. It turns "my back hurts" into "I missed my daughter's recital because I couldn't sit in a chair for an hour."
That makes so much sense. It humanizes the injury.
Precisely. And alongside the journal, you have to follow the doctor's orders religiously. This is the compliance factor.
Oh, I'm bad at this. If the physical therapist says come 3 times a week and I'm feeling okay-ish, I might skip one.
And the insurance defense lawyer will love you for that. They'll argue, if the plaintiff was truly in pain, they wouldn't skip appointments. You have to view your recovery as a job. You show up, you do the work, you document it.
Let's distinguish between the types of trouble you can be in. The source separates civil from criminal.
Right. Criminal is state versus you. That's for things like DUI, reckless driving, hit and run. That ends in jail time. We want to avoid that.
And civil is you versus the other driver. That's about money.
It's about money. Medical bills, lost wages. If you're a graphic designer and you break your hand, you can't work for 6 weeks. That income loss is recoverable. And the big one, future medical expenses.
Future expenses.
This is huge. If you're going to need back surgery 10 years from now because of this crash, you need to be compensated for that now. Once you sign the settlement, it's over. You can't go back for more.
And there's a clock ticking on all this, right? The statute of limitations.
Yes. It varies by state or country. Could be 2 years, could be 5. But if you miss it by 1 day, your claim is dead. Doesn't matter how injured you are. If you miss the deadline, you get 0.
That seems harsh.
The law values finality, so you have to be aware of it.
The source also mentioned the impact on your job.
It adds a whole other layer of stress. If you're a delivery driver and you lose your license, the economic ripple effects are huge. It can jeopardize your whole career.
It's a cascading effect, which brings us to the final and frankly most hopeful section. The only way to truly win a car accident
is not to have one.
Prevention. The source pivots to defensive driving, but let's go deeper than just drive safely. What are the actual mechanics of staying alive?
It starts with understanding physics. The sources highlight speeding as a factor in 1/3 of fatalities. But people don't get the math of speed.
Is it linear? Like, is 60 miles per hour twice as bad as 30?
No, and this is the insight that scares me. Kinetic energy, the force that crushes the car, increases exponentially. You double your speed, you quadruple the energy. Crashing at 65 is vastly more destructive than at 45.
It's a different class of destruction.
It is. So slowdown isn't just nagging, it's energy management. Then you have distraction. We all know about phones. But the source uses a term, inattention blindness.
What is that?
It's a cognitive thing where your eyes are looking at the road, but your brain isn't recording the image because you're thinking about something else.
You're technically blind with your eyes open.
That is deeply unsettling. But it explains why people rear-end cars that are right in front of them. Their eyes saw it, but their brain was composing an email.
So treat driving like a complex task,
requiring 100% of your processing power. The source also mentioned those street survival courses.
Right. I've always thought those were for race car drivers.
Highly recommended for everyone. Most of us learned to drive at 16 and never learned another thing. These courses teach you how to handle a skid, how to emergency brake. It upgrades your software.
And what about the hardware? Maintenance?
It's the unsexy stuff. Tires and brakes. If your tires are bald, your stopping distance doubles. In a panic stop, that's the difference between a close call and a fatality.
And finally, mindset. The source talks about patience.
Don't let your emotions drive the car. Road rage, tailgating. You're choosing to increase your risk because you're annoyed. The source had a great quote.
Being right isn't worth being in the hospital.
I think I need that tattooed on my steering wheel.
Me too. It just puts the ego in check. Let the guy cut you off. You arrive 30 seconds later, but you arrive intact.
Exactly.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground, from the global crisis of 1.35 million deaths to the biology of adrenaline in that first golden minute. We played detective, we learned to zip it on fault, and we built a strategy for the aftermath.
And hopefully committed to driving in a way that makes all of that unnecessary.
It's a lot to take in, But if you had to boil this entire deep dive down to one core philosophy, what would it be?
For me, it's about control. You cannot control the other driver. You can't control the weather. But you can control your preparedness. You can have the checklist. You can control your speed. If you focus on your sphere of control, you drastically reduce your odds of becoming a statistic.
Panic to procedure.
Panic to procedure.
I want to leave everyone with a thought that really stuck with me from the beginning. That stat about young people.
The 5 to 29 demographic.
Yeah. It's strange, isn't it? We act like cars are these freedom machines, these symbols of convenience. But for our kids and for us, they're the most lethal object we interact with.
It really reframes the simple act of a morning commute.
It does. Maybe the takeaway is just a little more respect for the machine, a little less autopilot, a little more awareness. Because the goal isn't just to get there fast.
It's to get there. Couldn't have said it better. Drive safe, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you on the next one.
Please like, subscribe, and get notified.